A word from our sponsors. AdQuick seamlessly connects advertisers to out-of-home media owners anywhere in the US and abroad, and makes it easier than ever to plan, buy, and measure every kind of outdoor advertising, from static billboards to hand-painted murals. If you run online ads, you're used to the speed of deployment and accountability provided via analytics. AdQuick provides the same experience digital marketers are used to in the OOH space. With AdQuick, advertisers gain immediate access to over 1,600 premium out-of-home media owners, can execute OOH buys 10 times faster, launch OOH campaigns in as little as 48 hours, and unlock unprecedented measurability. To learn more, go to adquick.com. Again, that's adquick.com. This is a disclosure. Please note that all guests featured on the AdTechGod pod are invited to participate. They do not pay in any form to appear on the show. However, guests may be sponsors of the AdTechGod community, the AdTech Forum, or other product offerings. Welcome to the AdTechGod pod, your window into the world of advertising technology and the people behind it. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Welcome back to another episode of the AdTechGod pod, the podcast where we meet the people in advertising. We have a truly special guest joining us, Rob Norman. Rob has been in the advertising and marketing industry for over 40 years, most notably as the Chief Digital Officer of GroupM Worldwide, an advisor and director for multiple companies, including Piano, Simpli Fi, MIQ, and more. His insights and perspectives are ones I've been eagerly waiting to dive into. Rob is not just a respected figure in the field. He's a pioneer who has dedicated his career to improving marketing solutions and products. His entrepreneurial drive and commitment to innovation is admirable. Today, we'll explore Rob's journey, discuss the evolving dynamics of our industry, and get his take on what the future holds for ad tech and advertising as a whole. Rob, thank you for joining us and welcome to the AdTechGod pod.
Delighted to be here.
Rob, I've been a huge fan, and I just wanted to start the entire podcast by saying thank you. Around 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember, maybe a year and a half ago, I had reached out saying that there was someone at an agency that I didn't know personally that was looking for work. And all I remember is you messaging me almost immediately and helping him get a job. And he reached back out to me a month later and said, I got a job. And it was through ATG and Rob Norman.
What a team.
You know what? It's we all need work. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to bring that up.
It's been a strange side effect of COVID, principally. A lot of people were very unstable when the pandemic began. A lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of good people lost their jobs. And I was in the fortunate position of not having a job to lose, but having means and time and quite an extensive network of contacts. And I had a lot of outreach from people who needed a bit of an assist. And in a funny sort of way, the dividend of a long career paid off in the first year of COVID when I knew enough people to connect enough other people that ended up with some good outcomes and some people now in super good jobs, which I'm thrilled about.
It was a very odd time, and I think you're right. I think stability in all aspects changed, right? I think a lot of people struggled with the challenges of being home all the time, the stress and anxiety of being home all the time, but also just financial instability, lots of layoffs, lots of changes. So I think the mental health problem is often overlooked, and sometimes the mental health can be not fixed, but, helped by giving you some stability in your life and your career. So thank you again for helping that person. Rob, you've been in the industry for a long time. You made me edit it from 20 to 40. It is impressive. I don't know how you've been in it for 40 years, which is incredible, but I hope to be there one day. How did your career in advertising and ad tech and marketing start, and what brought you to the point today?
Advertising was then, 40 years ago, and particularly the media side of advertising, was a great place to be if you were non-specifically bright, that you had a command of mental arithmetic and at the same time could think in whole sentences and paragraphs. But you weren't academically committed enough to be a lawyer or competitive enough to be a banker. And advertising was a sort of a refuge, if you like, mostly for literate and numerate liberal arts graduates. So I came into it from that way with a very poor bachelor's degree from a minor school in England, and a last minute gasp to get an interview from a magazine ad that was 2 weeks out of date. I called them and I said, I saw your ad. And they said, well, that's a 3-week-old ad. And I said, but you don't know that you've got the right candidate yet. And somehow I talked myself into an interview with my mum typing my resume and me picking it up and taking it with me. And I sat in the lobby of this ad agency, which is now, I suppose, part of Havas in the longest run of corporate gatherings. And the media director came down the stairs and said, what's 7% of 11? And I said 0.77. He said, okay, come upstairs and we'll talk. And I got the job and it was great. And I had no idea what enormous fun the media side of the business could be, because sort of everyone knows that there are TV shows and everyone knows that there are TV commercials, but who knew that there was a whole business in putting one inside the other and what the economics of that were. And I found that I really liked it. And I was able to move quite quickly through that early phase of the business out of sort of sheer blind enthusiasm, I suppose, because I finally found something that I found really interesting, which I never did when I was at school. Never. I hated school.
The industry is generally fun. I think the advertising industry is so different than, ad tech. Normally I'm talking to people in ad tech about, I've spoken to, folks from GroupM, and I have many more lined up in the future that are more agency side and brand side. But there is a fun element to working in advertising as a whole. I'm experiencing this with AdTechGod and seeing how it's expanded from, one to many and moving into different formats and creating a brand and an image and a product offering. It is fun. Like the advertising piece and the marketing piece is super exciting to me, which makes me wonder why I ever got into ad tech. Like I should have just gone to an agency.
Being in ad tech now, I suppose, is the equivalent of being in the media piece of the advertising agency when I started, in some respects, in that it was a very specialist silo within the business that in lots of ways wasn't emotionally that connected to the star part of the business, which of course is the creative function, was always the kind of alpha gene in the business. And actually the creative function and the real power brokers were the account management folks, because the account management folks in those days were not sort of, some people would think of them as water carriers between the clients and the agency and the creative department, but they really were the people that were charged with building the C-suite relationships, with acculturating the customer to think in a way that would be receptive to the way that the agency solved problems, and helping creative directors and planners really sell challenging work. And that was a fantastic job. And those guys, and there's an elite group of them, and some of them are still around in the business. If you think of the sort of the superstars, people like Andrew Robertson, for example, who's now the global CEO of BBDO, a bona fide superstar in the business. Andrew was a great account man. And that's a fantastic skill, much underrated these days.
You obviously worked in the agency side and you became the chief digital officer at GroupM Worldwide. How was that transition? I mean, you were initially working with regular clients on the advertising piece, and then you moved into the digital world, which was probably small, nascent piece of the overall budget and focus, and probably watched it kind of scale during your time there. What was the biggest highlight, or what did you learn from that?
Well, happy accidents, really. I mean, I was on a tube train in London, a subway train, one day going to work, and an American, I assume from his dress and his extremely shiny shoes, left a copy of the Wall Street Journal on his seat. And in that copy of the Wall Street Journal was what we would now call an infographic of the Time Warner Orlando full service network trial, a early broadband offering that brought together video on demand and many, many technology companies like Philips CDI and Matsushita 3DO, as well as Prodigy and CompuServe, and of course, online ordering of pizza from Domino's, which was one of the standard features of any interactive trial in those days. And I read this and I went to the office and I went to see my boss and said, I think I know what the future looks like. It's this. And I gave him the Wall Street Journal. He said, go write a presentation about it. So I did, which was completely accurate, apart from it didn't mention the possibility of the World Wide Web, which is a detail that I overlooked. But it led to us starting an interactive unit of the agency at the very end of 93, beginning of 94. And we were doing CD-ROM projects for people. And our first online ad bookings, which I suppose were at the end of 94, beginning of 95, were buying ad slots by the day on UK portals. And it was super interesting. And there were always sort of side issues like the rush to do domain registrations for clients and so forth. And then the thing just started iterating incredibly quickly from search listings to SEM and through all of the generations of it. And I was lucky enough to stay one step ahead of my immediate peers. And just as the business evolved, I was lucky enough to sort of be holding on to the saddle, if you like. And really, from then, through our acquisition of our company by WPP, the eventual creation of GroupM, I was just fortunate to stay one step ahead of most of the rest of the people and to maintain the confidence of some really incredible bosses. Chris Ingram, a pioneer of the media services industry in the UK, was my boss for many, many years and still a dear friend. I then worked for Erwin Gottlieb, a true legend in the business, and Martin Sorrell, of course. And I was fortunate enough to kind of keep their confidence and be able to sort of manage sideways up and down and keep it going. And all of us that were involved in that, and there's a whole generation of us to do that, were really, really fortunate. Most of us on the agency side were non-technical, but what we were doing was drawing the bridge between the needs of advertisers, the behaviors of media agencies, and the technology people that are enabling this new world. And so it was no moment apart from sitting on a tube train and picking up a copy of the Wall Street Journal.
It's a pretty incredible story. You experienced, I guess, a massive shift and change in how media was being bought from probably a traditional television and print and magazine to the internet. And obviously, since 1995 and the 90s, buying has changed, and now there's quite a bit of technology involved in delivery and measurement and capabilities that we have in market. Where do you see things going, in the next 12 to 18, 24 months when you think about future trends, technology changes, regulation, cookie deprecation? There's a lot happening at the same time, but where do you see things moving towards?
The biggest change in my career in media buying was from a business that was dominated by futures markets, manifested by the upfront in the US and its analogs around the world, to a world that was dominated by dynamic auction-based spot markets, which is where we are now. And that was, if you're looking for the massive macro, and everything that sort of followed from that is all part of that big move and the change in emphasis, which has led to a marketplace where advertising and the delivery of media is simultaneously more targeted, more responsive, therefore more data infused, which leads us into the place we find ourselves, because if you want to connect data to inventory and solve the supply puzzles that go with that, then you tend to be seeking some kind of identifier in order to get you there with the greatest degree of accuracy and efficiency. And we now find ourselves in a difficult period around coalescing around what identifiers need to be, and ones that satisfy regulators, satisfy consumers, and satisfy the needs of advertisers. And there seem to be a few in the market, and there's a few general ones at the trade desk and so forth, and there's a few very specific ones within the walls of the walled gardens. But the notion that was sort of the peak fluidity of ad tech was the idea that you could apply all of the data to all of the inventory all of the time and in real time seems to be a more distant and complex prospect now than perhaps it was even 5 years ago. So my sense is that we are heading back to a period that looks actually a lot like the mid 1990s or late 1980s, when you had, in the US context, a walled garden of NBC and its data a walled garden of CBS, and its data a walled garden of Hearst, and its data, and so forth. And that what you had to do was that you had to work out how to plan and execute within all of those environments that were proprietary, that protected very much against data leakage, that protected very much against moving consumers, and then move back to sample-based methodologies that allowed you to plan, target, and attribute across those different walled gardens. And I feel now, looking at Facebook's universe or Meta's universe, looking at Amazon's universe, and many others beside Roku's and so forth, that it feels that we're in a similar kind of place to that. And the industry is going to have to adjust to the idea of sort of intra-platform planning and cross-platform modeling and attribution.
Do you think that that is probably the biggest challenge that we're going to face in the next couple of years? It's hard for me personally to grasp what is or is not the right path to identifiers, right? Like, what is the right identifier at the right time, at the right platform or device between, cookies and device IDs and IP addresses and hashed emails? Like, there's so many different options. But do you think that's going to be the battle for what wins? Is what is the identifier of choice, and what is the industry identifier that will be used most often?
So I think there's two battles, and I think that's certainly one of them, and it's very considerable. I say in my mind, I've hopped beyond the idea of the universal identifier, because I'm not sure that the motivation exists if you are Meta or if you are Alphabet or if you are Amazon, amongst the biggest of the big players, whether you're motivated to have a universal identifier, because those people will think with intent data at Alphabet, with transaction data at Amazon, and with social and behavioral data at Meta, that they have enough of a large data pool to create incredibly efficient advertising machines. And you only have to look at the published results of those companies to know that that is palpably true. And so once you establish that that is true, the chance of there being universal identifiers sort of goes, in my mind, to zero. And so therefore I stopped thinking about it. So I'm really interested in the way that people think about connecting things across platforms. I like the idea that people are dusting off some interesting market mix modeling tools that everyone assumed belonged to a different age, and realizing that because there's no sort of identifier Esperanto or Babelfish that connects all of these things together, people have to go back in the trenches and do that work in a different way. So I think you're right that that's one of the problems. I think the other problem, which is greater than all of that, is where technology and advertising, and I say that as distinct from ad tech, because I don't think it's the same thing, is taking us from a societal point of view. And I worry considerably about the social impact of what we are doing and what is done in our name, what the industry is doing. And it sort of takes me back a bit. The college episode that we're going through at the moment takes me back a little bit to the Arab Spring, almost 15 years ago now. And many of your listeners, perhaps you will recall that at the time of the Arab Spring, social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter in particular, took enormous credit as being enablers of the Arab Spring, because social networks were antithetical to dictatorship. They democratized the access of information and communication and allowed people to communicate with each other and with the outside world in the way they never had before. You will notice, by contrast, that social platforms are not taking a great deal of credit for the goings on university campuses right now, and many other things as well. And I think there's little doubt in my mind, despite the protestations of the owners of those platforms, and even the intent of those platforms, they are in fact the enablers of a very changed world. And that changed world is funded by advertisers. And that is all there is to it. And I do believe that advertisers have not taken as much responsibility as they should have. I think they've been deeply concerned with brand safety as a notion. I think they've been insufficiently concerned with social safety as a notion and as a fact. And that is an issue that will not go away.
So you think they're just overly concerned?
I think they're insufficiently concerned. And I think that they worry about brand safety and the atrocious adjacency. They worry about that a lot. But I think that many of them pay really lip service to the social safety issue.
Yeah. It's such a great perspective. I have a podcast with Claire Atkin at Check My Ads. She talks about this, about the bigotry and the hate and just the content that we find on social media platforms and occasional news sources and the concern around it. And I almost didn't know what to say because the perspective that I had coming from her, they're a industry watchdog. And to me, when I heard her speak, I almost didn't know what to say because from my perspective and where I sit in the world, that's not really something I think about on a day-to-day basis of, where is the content? What is the content? How negative is it? Is it hate-induced or not hate-induced? Because in my normal browsing behavior, I see that on occasion on, X or social media platforms. But it's not something that I really pay attention to. I just kind of block it and move on.
And crucially, what you do is that you have agency about your behavior in the online world, and you use your agency to select what it is that you watch, select what it is that you listen to, and you curate your feeds on your social media platforms in such a way that your curatorial control keeps most of what's worst away from you. Not all of it, but what you do when that comes past, you look the other way. I mean, literally, as metaphorically, you see things in your X feed, which are bad things. And you probably don't pause all that much to say, gosh, would that be there if this wasn't an ad-funded business? And when you look at it through the second order and the third order of these things, it's quite scary.
Do you think that AI is going to be the solution for this? Do you think it's brand safety measure that's the solution for this? Do you think it's third-party verification vendors? Do you think it's control?
What you're asking are brand safety questions. You're not asking social safety questions. So brand safety tools don't stop bad things being posted on these things. They just keep ads away from them. Yeah, great. Well done us. And AI, of course, for that matter, it's like, the genius and the tragedy of digital media platforms is that exactly the same things that allow for their monetization, the same things allow for their weaponization. And it's a kind of perfectly symmetrical, ugly problem. It's exactly the same. The idea that you can have frictionless uploading of content, frictionless sharing of content, algorithmic recommendation of content, all of those things are what allows those platforms to be huge and powerful successes for advertisers. And all of those things are what allow those platforms to be hugely misused. Same thing.
An awesome perspective. The algorithms are made to provide content to you that you're interested in. It doesn't take much for it to start recommending content that you're curious about once or twice. Then suddenly you're bombarded with it as if this is what you want to read. So that is scary. And there should be controls around that at the admin level, at the upload level.
And meanwhile, within the advertising industry, and when we think about privacy and all of that stuff that goes with it, we worry about being retargeted for the same pair of shoes that we've already bought.
Right.
And that's the problem.
In your opinion, what advice would you have 40 years of experience, you obviously know a lot about the industry and its trends. But what advice can you give to people who are kind of earlier on in their career, whether they're new or 4 or 5 years in, about ad tech, about advertising, to better themselves and just be industry leaders?
So if you come to work in ad tech, you need to elevate yourself a little bit and ask yourself why ad tech exists. And what ad tech exists is in the service of delivering commercial messaging with the greatest efficiency to people. And what we're trying to do with commercial messaging is to change the way people think and the way people act in respect of brands and products and services. So that's why it's there. So that's useful. So what that allows you to do from that point, that's the basis from which you can bring your curiosity to work. Why is it that people take out new credit cards? Why is it that they would buy one soap powder over another? Why do they think about buying airline tickets 5 minutes in advance or 5 weeks in advance? Why do all of these things happen? And if you think about a lot of the why questions when you are doing your job, what you will do is have a pretty constant level of curiosity. And if you are curious, you will also be interested. And I've always thought that if you show up to work interested, the odds are that your day will be interesting. And my sense is that, yes, do something really specific. And in your early work is likely to be extremely repetitive. And sometimes you don't see where it's going. But if you take an elevated view as to what the purpose of that work is, and of course the cliche story is the alleged encounter between John Kennedy, the late President John Kennedy, and the janitor in Houston, when he asked the janitor who was sweeping the floor, and he said, "So, sir, what do you do here?" And he said, "Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Then what he was showing was that whilst he was performing a sort of completely functional task, he felt like he belonged to something. He was part of an overall mission and curiosity. And I think as long as you feel curious and part of a mission, you can have a great time in the business.
Yeah, I think it's common also for employees to feel like they're a spoke in the wheel, but don't necessarily know where that wheel's rolling to. I love that. He's, trying to put a man on the moon.
I think the spoke in the wheel story is exactly right. But it's what you can't rely on, although you would think you could rely on,
right,
is what you can't rely on is your company and your employer to always give you that context. I think it's up to you to have that context yourself about what you're doing. And every time a campaign comes across your hands and you look at the campaign objectives and what the ads are trying to do and so forth, think about it. Spend 5 minutes of the hour thinking about the higher order of what you're doing.
Incredible. Well, Rob, this actually brings us to the end of the podcast. This has been incredible. And thank you for your perspective and for your trust for being here today with me.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Success in all your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll speak soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, a podcast for the people about the people that make AdTech great. Stay connected with me for more insights, trends, and interviews in the realm of AdTech. Don't miss out on our latest updates, so follow me on X, Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, ATG Slack community has insights, networking opportunities, and jobs. Keep the conversation going and stay at the forefront of AdTech innovation.